My name is Roland Mercer, and I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer, building bridges for a living. I always said that the most important part of any bridge isn't the steel or the concrete. It's the foundation. You can't see it. It's buried underground, out of sight. But everything depends on it. I didn't know, until the week after my son's wedding, that the man my son had married into our family had no foundation at all. He was all surface, beautiful, gleaming surface. And I almost didn't find out until it was too late. Let me tell you how a 63-year-old retired engineer from Columbus, Ohio, dismantled a con man using nothing but patience, a good lawyer, and a secret he'd been keeping for 14 months. Before I get into it, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you believe that the smartest thing a man can do is know when to stay quiet, hit like and subscribe. Because this story is about exactly that. My son Elliot is 31 years old. He has his mother's eyes and her stubborn streak and her way of believing the absolute best in people until they give him a reason not to. His mother, my wife Diane, passed away from pancreatic cancer 4 years ago. It was the kind of loss that doesn't leave you. It just relocates. It moves from the front of your chest to somewhere deeper, somewhere you only feel it when the house gets too quiet. Elliot took it hard. Harder than I let myself show because one of us had to stay upright. He threw himself into his work, his running, his weekend hiking trips. He was moving fast enough that grief couldn't quite catch him. And then, about 2 years ago, he stopped moving fast. He met someone. His name was Griffin. Griffin Thane. Griffin was 34, sharp-dressed, well-spoken, the kind of man who remembered your drink order and your mother's name and made you feel, somehow, like you were the most interesting person in any room. He worked in wealth management, he said. Private clients, high net worth portfolios. He drove a silver Audi that looked recently detailed. He brought a very good bottle of scotch to our first dinner and asked me with what seemed like genuine curiosity about the Bear Creek Bridge project I'd worked on back in 2009. He was impressive. I'll give him that. He was very, very impressive. The first time something snagged at me, I couldn't even name it. It was at Elliot's birthday dinner, 8 months into their relationship. Griffin was telling a story about his family, his parents up in Vermont, his sister who taught at Dartmouth. He told the story easily, naturally, with the kind of casual detail that makes something feel real. But his hands were wrong. They were still. Too still. I've spent 30 years watching people give presentations about load-bearing structures that they didn't fully understand, and I've learned to watch hands. Nervous people move their hands too much. People who are carefully constructing something move their hands not at all. I filed it. I didn't say anything to Elliot. Then came the engagement, 6 months later. Then the wedding planning, the venue deposit, the caterer, the photographer. Griffin's family was coming down from Vermont. His parents, his sister, and aunt from New Hampshire. I started hearing about them in detail. His father, Roland, a retired school principal. His mother, Helen, a quilter. The sister, Julia, the Dartmouth professor. The wedding was in September at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside Columbus. It was a beautiful day, cool and clear. The kind of Ohio autumn that almost makes you forget the winters. Elliot was radiant. I walked him down the aisle and I kept my face steady, the way I always do when something matters too much for me to let it show. I shook Griffin's father's hand at the reception. A tall man, broad smile, lots of loud stories about Griffin's high school football days. His mother pulled me into a hug and said that Elliot was just precious and that she was so glad the boys had found each other. His sister talked to me for 20 minutes about urban infrastructure policy. She was charming and intelligent and asked very good follow-up questions. I flew home that Sunday feeling, for the first time in a long time, something close to peace. My son was happy. He had someone who loved him. Whatever unease I'd been carrying, I told myself it was just the overprotective reflex of a man who didn't want to lose anyone else. I was wrong to let it go. I knew it the following Thursday, when Griffin came to my house alone. Elliot was at a conference in Chicago. Griffin called ahead, said he was in the neighborhood, said he wanted to talk about something important, something about making sure I was taken care of. He arrived with a folder. Not a briefcase, just a manila folder. Casual, like it was nothing much. He sat across from me at my kitchen table and explained that he and Elliot had been talking. About my retirement. About the house. About what would happen if my health declined. He slid the folder across the table like it was a brochure for a vacation package. Inside was a financial power of attorney document, a healthcare proxy amendment, and a third document that I needed to read twice before I understood what it was. It was a property transfer agreement. It would move the deed to my house and to the lake property in Hocking Hills that Diane and I had owned for 22 years into a joint trust managed by Griffin. He watched me read it. His expression was helpful, patient, slightly concerned. He said, "I know it looks like a lot of paperwork, but it's really just a safeguard. You've worked so hard, Roland. Elliot worries about you out here alone. We both do. This just makes it official that we're here." I had not told Griffin or Elliot or anyone outside of my financial advisor and my estate attorney that 14 months earlier my father had passed away and left me an inheritance of $9 million. My father was a quiet man who bought farmland in central Ohio in the 1970s when no one thought it was worth much. By the time he died at 88, it was worth considerably more. I had said nothing to Elliot about it because Elliot had just lost his mother, because the timing felt wrong, because I wanted to be certain of the people around me before I ever let that kind of number enter the room. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with a property transfer document in my hands, I understood why I had waited. I closed the folder. I put it back on the table between us. I looked at Griffin and said very calmly that I appreciated his concern, but that I had my own attorney who handled all of my financial and estate matters, and that I wouldn't be signing anything without her review. I said it the same way I'd say I already have a contractor thanks to a door-to-door salesman. His smile didn't leave his face. But something behind it went cold. It was fast, just a flicker, like a power fluctuation in a building's lights. "There and gone," he said. "Of course, absolutely, no pressure at all." He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and let himself out. I stood at my kitchen window and watched his Audi pull out of my driveway. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia Wynn. She's been my family's attorney for 11 years. She handled Diane's estate. She's the kind of woman who speaks in full sentences at all times and never seems surprised by anything, which is exactly the quality you want in a lawyer. I told her what had happened. There was a brief silence on her end. Then she said, "Roland, do not sign anything. Do not discuss your assets with him in any context, and call me first thing Monday morning." Then she said, "And call Dennis. Dennis Albright is a man I went to college with at Ohio State. We pledged the same fraternity. He spent 28 years as a federal investigator, 10 of them in financial crimes. He retired to Hilliard 4 years ago, and now, as he puts it, consults for people who need to know things that aren't easy to find out. I hadn't called him in 2 years. I called him that evening. I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, which is a quality Dennis has always had. When I finished, he said, "Send me everything you know about this guy. Full name, employer, vehicle, any social media, wedding photos, if you've got them. Give me a few days." What I didn't tell Dennis yet, because I hadn't processed it enough to say out loud, was the thing that had been bothering me since the wedding. Griffin's father had introduced himself to me as Roland, same name as me, and when I mentioned it, laughing a little, saying it was funny we shared a name, he looked at me for just a half-second too long before laughing back, like a man who had momentarily forgotten what he was supposed to be called. I hadn't been able to shake that half-second. The call from Elliot came 2 days later. His voice was tight in a way I recognized from when he was a teenager and had already decided he was right about something. He said Griffin had told him about the visit, that I'd been cold, that I'd refused to even discuss protecting my own health and future. He said, "Dad, he's trying to help. He's my husband. You have to start treating him like family." I told him I loved him. I told him I wasn't trying to make his life harder. I told him that I needed him to trust me a little longer. He said, "I'm tired of you not trusting him." And then he went quiet in that particular way that means the conversation is over. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that. Outside, my neighbor's kid was shooting hoops in the driveway. The sound of the ball on the concrete was the only thing in the world for a few minutes. I thought about Diane. She would have figured Griffin out inside of 20 minutes the first time she met him. She had a precision about people that I've never had. She would have found the lie the way an engineer finds a hairline fracture. Quietly, methodically, without making it dramatic. I was going to have to do it her way. "Dennis called on a Wednesday evening," he said. "I need to come over. Don't talk about this on the phone." He arrived 45 minutes later with a laptop and the expression of a man who has found something he wishes he hadn't. He sat up at my kitchen table, the same table where Griffin had laid out his folder, and he started from the beginning. "Your son-in-law's real name is Griffin Thane," he said. "That part checks out, but pretty much everything else he's told you is constructed. He pulled up a credit report. Griffin had $178,000 in personal debt across 9 credit accounts. 3 were in collections. His LLC, Thane Capital Advisors, had been dissolved by the state of Ohio 8 months ago for failure to file annual reports. The Audi was leased. The lease payments were 4 months behind. I stared at the screen. I thought about Elliot, about the restaurant they'd taken us to for their anniversary dinner, the kind of place where they bring the check in a leather folder. I thought about the weekend trips to Nashville, the concert tickets, the apartment on the short north. Where does the money come from? I asked. It doesn't, Dennis said. He's running about 4 different credit lines against each other. Cash advances covering minimum payments. It's a house built on smoke. The whole investment manager identity is a front. He's not registered with FinRay. He has no Series 65 license. He has no clients on record. He calls himself a consultant on paper, so he can't be easily charged with practicing without a license. He's built just enough of a professional-looking shell that nobody looks too hard. He turned the laptop toward me and pulled up a scanned court document. It was a civil complaint filed in Cuyahoga County 2 years ago. The plaintiff was a woman named Diane Rosso. That name hit me strange for a second. A 58-year-old recently divorced woman who had met Griffin at a financial wellness seminar. He had positioned himself as a private wealth advisor, convinced her that her divorce settlement was being mismanaged, and persuaded her to transfer $340,000 into an account he controlled. 7 months later, the money was largely gone, absorbed into what he claimed were failed short-term trades. She sued. The case settled out of court under a confidentiality agreement. He paid her back a portion, I asked. $60,000, Dennis said. He probably borrowed it from the next person. The second document was from 2 years before that, a complaint filed in Franklin County. A 64-year-old widower named James. He'd met Griffin through a church investment club, gave him $210,000. Same story. Failed trades, dissolved LLC, confidential settlement, both men, both widowed, or recently single. Both at a vulnerable transition point, both found through social networks built around trust. I looked up from the screen. He has a type, I said. Yes, Dennis said, and your son fits it perfectly. Someone emotionally available, connected to a parent with assets, trusting by nature. Elliot isn't the real target, Roland. Elliot is the access point. You are the target. You always were. I got up and walked to the window. The streetlights had come on. A woman was walking a dog past my driveway. Everything looked ordinary and nothing felt like it was. There's one more thing, Dennis said. He'd been holding it. I could tell by the way he said it. The family at the wedding, his parents, his sister. I turned around. He pulled up a website. It was a talent agency out of Cincinnati called Clearwater Ensemble. It represented actors and voice artists for corporate events, commercials, conventions, and, as the website put it, private and personal engagements. He clicked through to the talent roster. He found a man listed as George Alderman, 61, specialties including distinguished authority figures and mentor archetypes. The face was Griffin's father from the wedding. The man who shared my name and had taken a half-second too long to respond to it. He clicked again. A woman listed as Barbara Kane, 63, specialties including warm, maternal presence and family event roles. Griffin's mother, the quilt maker from Vermont, the Dartmouth professor, the aunt from New Hampshire. They were all there. A full cast. Booked for a single day, September 14th, the day of my son's wedding. Dennis had obtained a billing record through means he didn't specify and I didn't ask about, showing that payment for the full ensemble had been issued from an account linked to Griffin's dissolved LLC 3 days before the wedding. I sat back down at the table. I have designed structures meant to carry millions of pounds. I have calculated load tolerances and stress thresholds and failure points. In 31 years, I have never had the experience of looking at a set of numbers and feeling my stomach drop the way it did in that moment. Not because of what it meant for me, because of what it meant for Elliot. My son had gotten married, surrounded by strangers in rented roles, playing the part of a family that didn't exist, and he had cried during the vows. I had watched him cry. I had held it together so he wouldn't see me lose it. Dennis left the documents with me and told me to call Patricia in the morning. Patricia's office is on the 14th floor of a building downtown that has a view of the Scioto River. She looked at everything Dennis had brought over without changing her expression once. When he finished presenting it, she set down the last document, folded her hands on the table, and looked at me. "What do you want to happen?" she asked. "I want my son out," I said. I want Griffin gone in a way that Elliot cannot talk himself out of seeing. Not my accusations. Evidence he can't explain away. Criminal prosecution is an option, she said, but it's a long road. It's public, it's brutal, and Elliot becomes the victim on the public record. A good defense attorney could argue Griffin's settlements with the previous plaintiffs, show civil resolution, not criminal pattern. He'd paint you as a controlling father who interfered with his son's marriage. What's the other option? She almost smiled. We give him exactly what he came for. The structure she designed over the next 10 days was called the Mercer Family Trust, an irrevocable trust, she was clear to emphasize, which meant that once assets were placed in it, they were governed by the rules of the document and the rules alone. We would present it to Elliot and Griffin as my estate planning response to the wedding, my way of formalizing the family's financial future now that Elliot had a spouse. The trust would be funded with the $9 million inheritance. The stated purpose was legacy and security. The bait was an annual income distribution to Elliot as primary beneficiary, projected at approximately $400,000 per year, indexed to performance. When a man who is drowning in debt hears $400,000 a year for the rest of his spouse's life, his nervous system responds in a way that bypasses his judgment. Inside the document, buried in Section 8, was what Patricia called the integrity and accountability provision. It had two components. The first was a spousal verification clause. Any spouse of a primary beneficiary was required to consent to a comprehensive background review conducted by the independent trustee before any distributions could be made. The review covered financial history, legal history, and what the document called material representations of personal identity made to the beneficiary's family. This review was a condition of every subsequent distribution, not just the first. The second was a disqualification clause. If the trustee's review, or any evidence independently presented to the trustee, established that a spousal beneficiary had engaged in financial fraud, misrepresentation of identity, or prior legal misconduct of a material nature, that individual would be permanently disqualified from any benefit of the trust. Furthermore, all distributions to the primary beneficiary would be suspended pending full resolution. The suspension clause was the kill shot. It meant that if Griffin tried to stall or deny, Elliot would be the one losing the income until it was resolved. It gave Elliot a financial reason to face the truth. I called Elliot on a Sunday afternoon. I told him I'd been doing a lot of thinking. I told him I wanted to do something meaningful for his future, that I'd been sitting on some things I hadn't fully dealt with after his grandfather's passing, and that I wanted to set up a real plan for the family. I mentioned the trust. I mentioned that it was funded with Grandpa's inheritance. I mentioned the income figure. The silence on his end lasted about 4 seconds. Then, "Dad, are you serious? I want you and Griffin to come in and meet with my attorney next Friday," I said. "I want to do this right." He called me back an hour later. I could hear the shift in his voice. The warmth that had been careful and guarded for weeks suddenly opened again. He said Griffin was grateful. He said Griffin thought this was a really mature and generous step. He said they'd be there Friday. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. I wasn't proud of myself. I want to be clear about that. There is no satisfaction in setting a trap for a man your son believes in, but there was no other way. I had tried to imagine telling Elliot directly, sitting him down, showing him the credit reports, the court filings, the actors' headshots. I had played the scene out in my head 100 times, and every version ended the same way. Elliot defending Griffin, Griffin reframing it as persecution, and me losing my son a second time. The only move was to let Griffin expose himself. On Friday morning, I put on the same jacket I wore to Diane's funeral because I needed to feel steadied, and I drove to Patricia's building, and I waited. They arrived together. Elliot was wearing the navy blazer I'd given him for his 30th birthday. He hugged me at the door, a real hug, the kind we hadn't had since before the wedding. Griffin came in behind him, and the change from our kitchen table conversation was striking. He was not a man trying to manage a cautious elderly Mark. He was a man arriving to collect what he'd worked for. His posture was different, broader. His handshake was firm in a way that communicated arrival rather than deference. He looked around Patricia's office the way you look at a place you're about to own. "This is wonderful," he said, settling into the chair across from Patricia. "Really, Roland, this means everything, to both of us," Patricia began. She walked through the trust structure methodically, clearly, professionally. The principal amount, the investment mandate, the projected distributions. I watched Griffin the way I'd been trained to watch a structure under load. looking for movement in the places that aren't supposed to move. He leaned forward when she said 400,000 annually. His right hand gripped the armrest for just a moment, then released. He was doing the math. He was paying off the credit cards in his head. He was already somewhere else, somewhere he thought he was going, and he was not listening carefully to the part that came next. The trust includes a number of standard provisions for an estate of this size, Patricia said, her tone unchanged. Most are administrative, but we'll walk through the significant ones together. Section 8 is what we call the integrity and accountability provision. Griffin nodded. Of course, sure. Elliot glanced at me. I gave him a small, neutral nod. Patricia read the spousal verification clause in full. Her voice was even and clear, every word precise. I saw it happen the first fracture. Griffin's nod slowed. The expression didn't change, but the quality of his attention shifted, sharpened, the way a man's does when he stopped looking at the view and started looking for the exit. A background check, he said. He turned the phrase into something casual with a small laugh. Sure, yeah, I've got nothing to hide. Elliot, this is normal for estate planning at this level. They just need to document everything, Elliot said. Of course. He didn't seem worried. Patricia moved to the disqualification clause. She read the material representations of personal identity provision. Slow, deliberate. I was watching Griffin's hands. They had stopped being still. The left one was now resting too carefully on the table, each finger placed, not resting. This would include, Patricia said, and she paused just briefly, familial representations made to the beneficiary's family during the course of the relationship. For example, the identity and existence of immediate family members presented as such. The air in the room changed. Griffin's face didn't collapse all at once. It was a slow failure, the way a retaining wall fails. Not all at once, but in a sequence, one panel losing integrity, and then the next. The color left his jaw first. Then his eyes moved just slightly to the folder sitting at Patricia's left hand, the one he hadn't been introduced to yet. Elliot frowned. What does that mean? Familial representations? Patricia slid the folder to the center of the table without hurry. These are materials the trustee would be reviewing as part of the verification process, she said. Given that they are already in our possession, we felt it appropriate to share them today. She opened it. The credit report was on top. Then the court documents from Cuyahoga County, then Franklin County. Then, at the bottom, the Clearwater Ensemble billing record with the actor names and their assigned roles printed in an itemized invoice. Father of the groom, George Alderman. Mother of the groom, Barbara Kane. Elliot picked up the last sheet. He looked at it. He looked at it for a very long time. Griffin stood up. It wasn't a controlled exit. His chair didn't go over, but it scraped back hard against the floor. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, because until that moment he had never let me see the face underneath. It was the expression of a man who has miscalculated badly and is running the numbers in real time and coming up short every time. This is a setup, he said. His voice was lower than usual and had lost the polish. This is you, Roland. You've been doing this from the beginning. You have never accepted us. You have never given me a chance, and this is... He stopped. He looked at Elliot, and what he said next was the thing I had been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. Elliot. His voice was flat now, controlled in the wrong direction. I need you to understand something. Your father has spent our entire relationship trying to pull you away from me. He doesn't want you to have this. He doesn't want you to have anything that isn't his to control. Elliot was still looking at the invoice. He hadn't looked up. Your dad was my mark, Griffin said. That's the word. I'm telling you because it doesn't matter anymore. I found you because you fit a profile. Grieving, trusting, connected to a parent with assets and no existing estate structure. It was the right situation. I was careful. I did everything right. His voice had taken on a strange quality, almost clinical, like he was debriefing himself. The only thing I didn't account for was him. He looked at me, not with hatred, with something closer to professional acknowledgement, the way one engineer might look at another after a structure they built gets taken apart correctly. He never trusted me, Griffin said. I could never get him warm. I should have walked away 6 months in. Then he picked up his jacket, folded it over his arm, and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He closed it with the quiet care of a man who has given up on the performance entirely. The room was very still after that. Elliot set the invoice down on the table. His hands were flat on either side of it, like he needed to feel something solid. He didn't make a sound. I watched his shoulders move once, a slow breath in, a slow breath out. Patricia gathered the documents quietly and stepped out of the room, giving us what she'd understood without being asked that we needed. I moved my chair around the table to sit beside my son. I didn't say anything right away. There's a thing engineers know about structural failure. The worst thing you can do in the immediate aftermath is start pulling at the wreckage before you understand what's still load-bearing. So I sat beside him and I waited. After a while, he said, "Were they all actors?" "Yes," I said. "Were they all actors?" "Yes," I said. "All of them? His parents? His sister?" "Yes." He closed his eyes. "I told Julia, the woman who said she was his sister. I told her about Mom, about how much Mom would have loved the ceremony." He stopped. "She cried. She held my hand and she cried." I didn't have anything to give him for that. Some things don't have an answer. I put my hand on his shoulder. "I defended him to you," Elliot said. "I know. I told you that you were the problem. I said you were controlling. I said, I know what you said, and I understood why. How did you know?" He looked at me then, finally, and his eyes were the exact color of his mother's. "When did you know?" I thought about it honestly. "I didn't know," I said. "I suspected. There's a difference. I had a feeling early that something about him was assembled rather than real. I saw him appraise things instead of experience them. But suspicion isn't enough to save someone. You had to see it yourself. My job wasn't to tell you the truth. My job was to create a situation where the truth had nowhere left to hide." He was quiet for a moment. "The trust," he said. "The 9 million. That's real?" "It's real. Your grandfather's land. It sold 2 years ago. You never told me." "I know. I'm sorry for that. I was waiting until I was sure of the people around you. I was waiting until I knew the number wouldn't change what people saw when they looked at you." I paused. "I was waiting until I was sure you were with someone who loved you for the right reasons." He made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't a laugh at all. "So instead of telling me, you built a trap." "I built a foundation," I said. "That's what I know how to do." He looked at the table for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "She would have known, wouldn't she? Mom." "First dinner," I said, "before dessert." He almost smiled at that. It didn't quite make it, but it was close. We sat together in Patricia's conference room for another hour. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Some of the most important structural work happens in silence, in the settling, in the slow process of things finding their equilibrium after the load shifts. Elliot filed for an annulment 3 weeks later on grounds of fraud in the inducement. Given the documented evidence of Griffin's misrepresentation of his identity, his financial history, and his familial relationships, it was granted in full within 60 days. Griffin did not contest it. He had already left Columbus. Dennis tracked his digital footprint to the Phoenix area, and then it went quiet in the way that a careful person's footprint goes quiet when they're starting over. I reported the case to the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division and filed a formal complaint with the relevant financial regulatory bodies. Dennis submitted his full investigative report as supporting documentation. Whether it leads to charges, I don't know yet. What I know is that it's on record. The next woman or man he approaches, there will be something there for their attorney to find. Elliot moved back into the house for a month, which was his idea, not mine. We ate dinner together most nights. We watched football on Sundays. We worked in the garden on weekends, clearing out the beds Diane had planted along the back fence, pulling the dead growth from the previous season, turning the soil over so it was ready for spring. He started seeing a therapist in the 2nd month. He started running again in the 3rd. By the 4th month, he was back in his own apartment and calling me twice a week and laughing in the same easy way he used to before all of this started. We don't talk about Griffin much. When his name does come up, Elliot doesn't flinch the way he used to. He talks about him the way you talk about a storm that came through and did damage, not with fear, not with bitterness, but with the flat acknowledgement that it happened, that you got through it, and that the structure held. Last month, Elliot came over for Sunday dinner and he brought someone, a guy named Oliver who teaches high school history and coaches the debate team and cannot stop talking about the Toledo Museum of Art. He is awkward in exactly the way that real people are awkward, uncertain in the way that honest people are uncertain about things that matter to them. He asked me what I thought about the new Scioto Greenways project, and when I talked about it, he listened with his whole face. I watched his hands while he told me about a lesson he'd been working on. They moved when he talked. Loose, natural, the hands of someone who isn't building anything, who isn't managing anything, who is just telling you what he thinks. I shook his hand at the end of the evening and I told him it was good to meet him. I'm sitting in my study now, a Sunday afternoon, the light coming through the back windows the way it does in late autumn, when it's gone gold and low. Diane's roses are cut back for the season, bare canes along the fence, waiting. The Mercer Family Trust document is on my desk, not as a weapon anymore, just as what it always actually was, a record of the lengths a parent will go to. People will tell you that money reveals character. I've come to think that's partially true. What money really does is remove the need to pretend. A man in financial freefall will eventually drop the performance because the performance becomes more expensive than the truth. Griffin dropped it in Patricia's conference room, not because we caught him, but because the cost of maintaining the illusion finally exceeded what he could carry. My job was never to catch him. My job was to make the illusion too expensive to keep. There's a principle in structural engineering called redundant load paths. It means that you build a structure so that if one element fails, the load transfers to another, and the whole thing stays standing. The idea isn't that nothing will ever break. The idea is that when something breaks, the structure holds long enough for you to fix it. That's what I was trying to build for my son, not a guarantee. A structure that would hold while we figured out how to fix it. I think we're going to be okay. I know Elliot is going to be okay. He's got his mother's eyes, and her stubborn streak, and her way of believing the best in people. That last part used to worry me. Now I think it's the thing I'm most grateful he kept. If my story has meant something to you, leave a comment below, and tell me where you're listening from. And if you know someone who's carrying a suspicion they don't know what to do with, share this with them. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is just refuse to sign anything until you've read every word. I've been sitting here thinking about cause and effect, not the version you learn in a classroom, but the real version, the one you only understand after you've lived through something that nearly took everything from you. Griffin didn't become who he was overnight. Somewhere along the way, he learned that charm was a more efficient tool than honesty. He practiced it. He refined it. He built an entire life out of performance, hired actors, fabricated credentials, manufactured warmth. And for a while, it worked. It worked on vulnerable people who had every reason to trust and no reason yet not to. The cause was a man who chose deception as a way of life. The effect was a trail of broken people, Diane Rosso in Cuyahoga County, James in Franklin County, and eventually my son standing in a lawyer's conference room holding an invoice for his own wedding family. What I keep coming back to is this. The truth doesn't need your help to exist. It just needs time and the right conditions to surface. My job wasn't to manufacture a different outcome. My job was to build conditions where the truth couldn't stay buried. That's not cleverness, that's patience. And patience is one of the hardest things a person can choose when everything in you is screaming to act. I made mistakes in this. I kept the inheritance secret longer than was fair to Elliot. I let him walk into a marriage without knowing the full picture of what was at stake. I told myself it was protection, but some of it was also my own uncertainty. My own grief after losing Diane, my own reluctance to let any new number change the way people saw my son. The cause of my silence was complicated. The effect was that Elliot entered one of the most important decisions of his life without information he deserved to have. I carry that. I'll keep carrying it. But here's what I also know. The foundation held, not because I built it perfectly, but because I built it with enough redundancy that when one element failed, the load transferred and the whole thing stayed standing. Elliot's capacity for resilience, his therapist's office on Thursday afternoons, the Sunday dinners, the garden work, Oliver showing up with his easy hands and his genuine curiosity about Toledo museum exhibits. None of that happened by accident. It happened because Elliot is a person of genuine character, and genuine character, once it's built into someone, doesn't get demolished by a con man. It bends, it takes damage, but it doesn't collapse. The most dangerous thing Griffin did wasn't the financial fraud. It was the slow, deliberate erosion of Elliot's trust in his own judgment. That's the thing that takes the longest to repair, learning to trust yourself again after someone has spent months convincing you that your instincts are wrong, that your father is the enemy, that the only person who really understands you is the one person who is lying to you from the start, that repair work is quiet and it's slow and it doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but it's the most important work there is. I watch Elliot now, and I see a man who is doing that work, not perfectly, not without setbacks, but steadily with the same stubbornness his mother had, putting one foot in front of the other in the right direction. That's what integrity actually looks like, not the absence of being deceived, not never getting it wrong. It looks like getting back up, looking clearly at what happened, and deciding that the truth is still worth building your life around even after someone used it against you. If this story stays with you, I hope it's that part you carry. Not the trap, not the confrontation, the part where a young man who got knocked all the way down got back up and decided that his capacity to love and trust people was still worth keeping. That's the only victory that matters. Everything else is just load calculations,